quick note about the pets. The pets won't be in for beta. They'll be in for launch, but we did want to kind of reveal, since we're talking about the Ranger Elite spec, we want to talk about what pets will be coming. So Bunny Thumper, obviously it's kind of like an in-joke. Anyone who's played Guild Wars 1, like I played Guild Wars 1 a lot of people in the studio have played Guild Wars 1 a lot, so when we think Hammer Ranger, just the natural understand, the first thing you think about is Bunny Thumper. For anyone who wasn't super familiar with that, we'll also give the speedrun overview of the Bunny Thumper, which was kind of this Ranger Warrior hybrid, because back in Guild Wars 1 you could actually dual profession. So Rangers would secondary class Warrior in order to get access to Hammer Bash and some other, Crushing Blow. Is Crushing Blow the name? I'm just going to get completely trashed by Guild Wars 1 fans, but I'm pretty sure that's right, Crushing Blow. But you go in for get those hammer skills to set up both, kind of create this more aggressive, very kind of damage CC focused aggressive character that played really well off the pet, because a lot of the pet skills care about like hitting a knockdown target. So you would invest into the warrior class to get access to these knockdowns and create kind of that Ranger Warrior hybrid. It got nicknamed the Bunny Thumper because back in Guild Wars 1 the Ranger had a really funny animation when you ran around with a hammer equipped. And it kind of did a little hop, so nicknamed Bunny Thumper. We thought about, obviously it comes to mind when we talk about Hammer Ranger at any point in time. Bunny Thumper, maybe not the most official name, so we kind of couldn't name the Elite Spec Bunny Thumper as much as we talked about it.
Yeah, it was on the table.
We did get a nice little reference in here with skill 5, which is called Thump. And a very nice, fun name there. But the general idea of the Untamed is we're trying to create this more, we did want to get some of the same kind of feelings from like Bunny Thumper, having that really good pet interaction, that gameplay of like comboing with your pet was something we really want to get with the Untamed, making sure that we still have that aggressive kind of identity in there, but we also wanted to create this kind of bruisery character, give Ranger the opportunity to have more of this frontline bruiser character while also keeping some aggressive nature. And that's what kind of created the Unleash mechanic, which is kind of the stance swap between offense and defense. So right now I'm actually in the Unleash state for the Ranger. And the first thing we'll call out here is that while you are Unleashed, your pet is kind of in its base form. But down here you can see that we've kind of exposed all of the pet skills as actual, key bindable actions for the Ranger themselves. So all the tail swipe enjoyers in chat, you are now allowed to cast Tail Swipe whenever you so choose, instead of relying on your Drake to kind of use it correctly. And this is really going to allow you to kind of set up combos between yourself and the Ranger.
I just want to point out there's a lot of Tail Swipe fans in chat right now.
I can imagine. Shout out to all the people who like
it's
Tail
happening.
Swipe. I love Tail Swipe. So obviously, more direct control means you don't have to worry about interrupting your pet when it's going to do something dumb. You can just always know that I'm going to set up a combo because maybe I do a knockdown, and then my pet's always going to be able to capitalize on that. It really, I think it just feels a lot better to have more direct control over that. So that's something I would want to do for this Elite spec. So the next thing we see is that when you unleash your pet, we see a couple things flipped over. We saw some of the hammer skills flip over, which we'll get to real quick. But first, we'll talk about these kind of new pet skills. There's 3 new pet skills. These are the pet actually does the attack here, but they are more Ranger abilities that are cast around the pet location. So kind of like Scourge Shades, where the pet is the conduit for this attack. And so the first thing we'll see on Venomous Outburst is we actually also gave a Shadow Step to Ranger pets, because why not? I mean, we're already giving Shadow Steps to pretty much everyone. So Venomous Outburst, it starts with a Shadow Step in, then does a quick poison AoE. And the cool thing about all of these kind of unleashed pet skills is that they also get a bonus effect against CC targets. So if you hit your enemy with Thump, Knockdown, there's some vulnerability on there as well. Next up, Rending Vines. This is going to be an AoE boon rip, and then again, if you hit a crowd control target, this is going to also then slow your target. And finally, we have Enveloping Haze, which is this nice projectile hate bubble, little poison field in there, so you can get a nice, a little bit of area weakness if you want to, and if that hits a CC target, it's going to chill, so disrupt cooldowns a little bit as well. So next up, we will talk about the hammer. So as we see with the Unleash stance swap, this offense-defense toggle that we kind of trying to do, we see that 2 through 5 all flip over. And the 1 skill doesn't change because it's just a pretty generic hammer auto attack, damage, damage, damage. Doesn't need to do anything too crazy here. But the flavor of these hammer skills is that they're actually the same skill, but a different kind of output of the same skill. So if we start off here with Wild Swing, when I am not in the Unleashed state, it will do an AoE, a little bit of damage and cripple. Then I hop over to Unleashed. The cooldown is shared. That's pretty important. We didn't want to just double the amount of skills on Hammer, so you will have to pick and choose your spots. But the Unleashed version of Wild Swing does not do any cripple. It does a lot more damage, and also will increase damage against crowd control targets. So then moving on to Overbearing Smash. So the whole idea, again, kind of that defense versus offense, a lot more CC and disruption on the baseline version of the skill, and then a lot more damage coming out from the Unleashed version of the skills. So we'll just run through these real quick. Overbearing Smash is kind of this 2-part attack where you do a very quick initial daze, get potentially an interrupt in there, and then follow up with this leap for a little bit of a longer daze to then set up any CC combos that you're looking for. Moving into Savage Shockwave, this is a kind of 3-part expanding small, larger, largest shockwave skill that's going to do a different condition, immob on the smallest radius, then weakness and vulnerability as it gets a little bit wider. And as mentioned before, skill 5 is just going to be Thump. Very streamlined, fun little skill name here for just the PBAOE knockdown skill. And that's going to set up, obviously, the CC bonuses on all of the pet abilities here, and then also on the Unleashed side, we already saw Wild Swing get some bonus value. Unleashed Savage Shockwave is also going to get damage bonus against disabled foes. This is also going to get increased damage per condition on your target. So we saw a lot of condition application from both the pet skills and some of the hammer skills on the base side. So Unleashed Savage Shockwave, potentially the largest damage potentially dealing skill for this kit. Overbearing Smash, a little bit different. We're not going to have any days in here. The quick attack here is still going to be potentially a nice reactive blind, so you can kind of blind an incoming attack, and then that'll follow up with a more powerful attack that is going to remove boons from your targets. And finally, we have Unleashed Thump. There's going to be a lot more damage, and still kind of trying to be that setup skill, even though it's not a CC, so it's going to give you Might and Fury per target struck. So cast it, get a bunch of Might, then go through, kind of use the rest of your abilities, and deal a lot of potential damage there. We'll talk a little bit more about like what the general ideas behind this kind of like shared cooldown and the offense defense stuff a little bit later. But for now, we'll just stick with the high level kind of skills demo that we've shown off and move into the cantrips here. So first up, we have Perilous Gift. This is going to be the heal skill, and I guess the common themes we're going to see in the cantrips, we're going to see some defensive stuff. We're going to see a little bit of mobility, but a lot of defense and a lot of crowd control. Kind of give the tools needed to this character to be that frontline aggressive bruiser or kind of more aggressive damage dealer. So starting off with the Perilous Gift, this is going to be kind of that ignore death mechanic that we've seen in a few places in the past. So for a few seconds, you will not be able to go below 1 HP, and then as you saw, once that buff expired, it drained health from your pet and healed you some amount. So you're going to want to make sure your pet is healthy. The counterplay there is obviously going to be hitting the pet. And because of that, this is going to prevent you from swapping pets while it's active, so you can't just swap at the last minute and get kind of your full health pet for full value. Next up, we're going to see Exploding Spores. So this is kind of a cool ability where it's going to be a kind of a ring of these spores that are just kind of AoE vuln and damage. Wait, it's actually cripple now. It used to do vuln, but that was we added vuln on some of the other skills, so now it does cripple. And so we see here, if all of these spores hit the same target, that target will also get knocked down. So a little bit of a bonus for lining this up really nicely, or potentially chaining it off of another CC, you'll get a nice little knockdown there. Otherwise, it's just more of that AoE damage and a little bit of cripple. Next up, we have Mutate Conditions. This is going to be a big Condi cleanse. Removes all conditions from yourself, but it's also going to give you vulnerability per condition cleansed. So potentially a lot of vuln, but it will be that kind of massive Condi cleanse that you really want to see as this kind of frontline melee character. Next up, we have the Shadow Step that we kind of spoiled previously, Unnatural Traversal. It's going to be a blink in, a little bit of AoE vulnerability. That's pretty much it. If you hit anything, you're going to get 50% cooldown refund, so this is really going to incentivize going in as opposed to using it to get out of fights. And last up, we're going to have a little bit more CC here with Nature's Binding. This is going to be a kind of PBA. We attack that creates these cages, similar mechanic that we've seen on Dragon Hunter Longbow, where it is this kind of area denial cage that you can't just walk through unless you happen to have something like stability. And finally, we're going to have the elite skill Forest Fortification. And this is the big defensive cooldown of the kit. We see resolution, resistance, stability, damage reduction. And the kind of cool thing about this skill is that anytime you hit an enemy while it's active, it's going to refund the cooldown a little bit. So really going to incentivize getting into those larger fights, and it's going to be a potentially lower cooldown, high defense value skill. Moving into the traits, we'll just run through these real quick. Starting off across the top, we're going to see a lot of, actually let's start with the minors. That's usually the way we start. Natural Fortitude, Game Vitality. Frontliner, Bruiser makes sense. Grandmaster trait, Vow of the Untamed. This is going to be kind of the character-defining defining mechanic of how Unleash functions. Of while you the ranger are unleashed, your outgoing damage will be increased, but you also take more damage. While your pet is unleashed, you will deal less damage, but you also take less damage. So again, that offense-defense toggle. And along the top, we'll see some traits that give you value for controlling an enemy. Here we see condition application, depending on target. Here's going to, depending on unleashed state, rather, sorry. Here we see boon application, depending on your unleashed state. And the Grandmaster trait is going to be cooldown reduction every time you crowd control a target. Across the middle, we're going to see some kind of more general value traits. Cleansing Unleash, this is going to be cleanse conditions when you swap. Just another solid source of condition removal. Bolstering Unleash, here's some more boons when you unleash, so it's going to, again, going into defense, I get protection, going into offense, I get might. Makes sense. And finally, Restorative Strikes. This is going to be potentially a powerful sustain trait. Heal yourself as a percentage of your outgoing damage. So the more you hit people, the more you get healed. And you can, and again, as enemies kind of dodge, evade, it's going to reduce the value of that trait. So some good counterplay in there as well. Then finally, we're going to have a couple pet-related things across the bottom, starting off with Blinding Outburst. This is going to augment the Venomous Outburst that we saw earlier. That's going to make it apply blind in addition to other effects. And then next up is Corrupting Vines, which is going to change Rending Vines into a boon corrupt as opposed to a boon rip. These guys don't have any boons, so you can't really tell. But a little bit more value there because it'd also be condition application on top of boon removal. And finally, the Grandmaster damage trait here, Ferocious Symbiosis. This is going to be kind of this pet and ranger interplay as while each other are hitting enemies, you're going to be giving each other stacks of this buff, which is damage and movement speed. So potentially some very fast movement, I guess, and obviously damage is what people care about here. It's kind of a minor callback to Rampage's one, different mechanic, but it was the elite skill of the Guild Wars 1 Buddy Thumper, which was that increased attack speed, which in this case we convert to damage, and also move speed. So there's the speed run of the Untamed. We'll come back to it again and talk a little bit more later in the show. All right, but coming back to the Untamed. So again, we kind of briefly talked about the high-level goals of to create this more like bruisery, frontline melee character, because you look at what ranger builds exist right now. Druid is more of that support character. Soul Beast is a little bit more of an... I personally define Soul Beast as a little more of that assassin-y style gameplay. Obviously, you do have some of the stances like Doliac stance. You have stuff like Bear stance. There's some good defensive options there as well. You can go with like defensive pets on the merge skills to create a little bit more of that bruisery gameplay, but it's still also a lot of single target stuff. So historically, we've seen a lot of rangers kind of relegated in PvP. We see a lot of rangers on side node, not the best in team fights because you don't have access to a lot of AoE stuff. So primarily sticking as those duelists or those single target WoW snipers. You know, everyone enjoys the Zerg full of longbow rangers just shredding you down with rapid fire. So for this character, we really wanted to get that change of pace and create kind of that melee bruiser, give some AoE potential, give some really good defensive tools to make sure that this frontline build could exist and be something like potentially a WoW frontliner or a PvP team fighter, or just something that runs around the open world and cleaves down large chunks of monsters at one time, instead of being more of that single target character that we've seen in the past. And so we already see a lot of that with kind of the unleashed pet skills here, where they're all PB AoE attacks. So that just gives a little bit more AoE value. These are all also kind of valuable things for a melee bruiser to have. We see like, okay, here's poison. That's going to allow you to poison. Venomous Outburst specifically was designed as this very quick attack. You see it's much faster. It's not even intended really to be particularly reactable because the damage is much lower. And it's supposed to be just like, here's a poison application. Here's the blind if you trade it. Here's this kind of skill that I can press when I need it to happen. In response to a heal, I poison you. In response to a key attack, I blind you. This is kind of that key skill that sets that play up. And then something like Rending Vines, which is much more of this just disruptive. Boon Rip is something that you like to see when you're in World v. World, when you're fighting against players that have a lot of protection, a lot of stability, all these boons that are going to like prevent you from fulfilling your role. You want to see some Boon Rip, so Rending Vines is Boon Rip. Enveloping Haze, again, melee bruisers are going to, traditionally struggle with ranged attacks coming at them. So here's a projectile hate bubble that's going to allow you to potentially close the gap. This can also this is attached to your pet, so as you cast it, then you can fire off, move your pet around with Venomous Outburst. There's that Shadow Step, move that bubble around potentially to block some key ranged attacks coming at you as you either walk in. Obviously we have some mobility on the kit with like Unnatural Traversal, blink in, but this does give you a bit more potential to fight against those ranged attacks in melee range. So then obviously outside of the AoE stuff, we have kind of the offense-defense toggle, which is the Unleash mechanic. And we talked about this a little bit earlier in the show, where trying to capture some of the essence of Guild Wars 1 Bunny Thumper, which was very much this aggressive, low defense, kind of damage dealer, CC character. Guild Wars 1 obviously a much different game. You always have a monk to bail you out, maybe you have ritualist to bail you out. So we can't just, port one-to-one, hey, here's Bunny Thumper in Guild Wars 2. Although we did kind of joke, hey, it's Bunny Thumper. What if the hammer kit was literally just Warrior Hammer and all the skills were identical? Wouldn't that be hilarious? It would be hilarious, but it wouldn't really be good from the gameplay side of things. It would be a huge letdown. It was never a serious consideration, just something we laughed about in meetings. It's like, well, Bunny Thumper was Ranger Warrior, so the Untamed actually just gets Warrior Hammer instead of getting a unique hammer. We kind of joked about that here with Natural Fortitude as well. This ended up just being a vitality trait, but the in-joke was, well, what if this just gave you enough vitality and toughness such that you had warrior levels of stats to really define that kind of pseudo-ranger-warrior hybrid? Probably not balanced. It would end up being a huge pile of stats on a minor trait, which is not particularly a good thing. So we just left it as, oh, here's a funny note for the live stream, and we actually balanced the character instead. Potentially a little bit less exciting, but balance is important when we design elite specs as well. But still, so coming back to like that offense-defense toggle, really want to have that super aggressive mode to go into, kind of as the Bunny Thumper callback, but also as just kind of the way that bruisers typically transition between like offense and defense. You look at something like Elementals is a great example of this. We see like Weaver, Corelli, all these traditional bruisers that you go into Earth Attunement, you have a lot more defense, and then you swap into Fire Attunement, you have a lot more offense. There's a very well-defined point of like where this transition happens. Looking at something like Warrior, you have like Shield Bash. That sets up for you to swap into Greatsword and get 100 Blades. Again, the defining moment is the CC into the swap into the big damage skill. So keeping that idea in mind was also kind of another driving factor behind having this Unleash mechanic, which, as we saw with the traits here, it kind of gives you outgoing damage adjustment depending on your stance, and also flips over the hammer kit to kind of create this either very defensive, very disruptive bruiser kit with kind of the base. We call it just the base version. I mean, there's no real actually defined name. Tongue-in-cheek version is, we call it the leashed state because the alternative is unleashed, but that's not super exciting or anything. But we have like the disruption, the defense, the crowd control here, and then we swap into the super aggressive unleashed version of the hammer. So depending on what you're trying to do, like obviously in PvE game modes and raids, you probably just want to focus on a lot of the unleashed side where you're going to have these powerful damage skills and you might just use all of them and not have to worry about the other side. Although the crowd control may come in handy for a break bar at some point. You may just end up being, a lot of aggression, a lot of damage. But Alternatively, you might come to the state, probably more in World v. World or PvP, where you do actually want, there are cases where you want access to like the cripple or the daze, into the emo, but the weakness, all these debilitating conditions, all the crowd control available here. But most likely, I think you're going to want a mix of the two, where when you look at a skill like Thump, which is going to be your knockdown, that's going to, excuse me, that's just going to enable your crowd control bonuses on Unleash Savage Shockwave and Unleash Wild Swing. I'm just going to take a quick water break. I can feel
Mark's hand is on the
feel the
button.
need. I just need like my own mute button so I can just, you know. All right. Should be all right. I was saying, yeah, so Thump kind of sets yourself up to have this, you know, CC into, especially if you have like enhancing impact. I mean, so again, this is like the super off the rails version of the show where I'm just kind of thinking through stuff. I have some notes, but this is kind of my, you know, stream of consciousness. Enjoy the rambling. So sometimes we end up a little bit not as well organized as we should be. But looking at something like enhancing impact, this is going to be quickness. This is going to enable you to do something like cast Thump, swap while it's casting, unleash Savage Shockwave into unleash Wild Swing, get the full value of those crowd control bonuses, and that's like a self combo that you can do. You don't have to worry about anything else. Alternatively, you have access to, you know, while I'm in this unleash state, I have all my pets abilities available to me. That's another interesting thing that we didn't really talk about too much. It'll be interesting to see if there's like any new pets that get a lot more use, or at least maybe people try out a few more pets because you have like direct access. Like I'm looking at something like MOAs, which, I mean, I don't expect MOA to be viable as a result of this, but it's interesting to see, okay, now I have access to Harmonic Cry. I have access to this AoE heal whenever I want it. I don't need to rely on the MOA to cast this ability intelligently. So maybe I take the MOA. Probably not. I mean, no one's going to take the MOA, but some people are going to try it out, and maybe it's secretly the answer. That's what brings the whole spec together, is slotting MOA. But even stuff like, you know, looking at the canine family, we have access to, you know, a lot more crowd control. We have Crippling Leap, and then obviously the Brutal Charge. Let's see, getting past notes. Chat wants Unleash on other weapons if possible. So this is something we talked about internally. Obviously, it's like first thing that comes to mind, right? Like we're literally in the live stream, no one's played the spec yet. What about other weapons? And initially, we're not going to see any interaction with Unleash on other weapons. We're going to have just the baseline interaction with Valve the Untamed, which is going to be that kind of ability defining or character defining like offense defense toggle. So when I have a greatsword equipped, I'm still going to be able to unleash and then have Maul do extra damage. We definitely talked a lot internally about like how are we going to, can we actually fit this mechanic into the other weapons in a way that feels good and also doesn't just, you know, power creep the game? Because there are some very easy options that we talked about of, I mean, I don't want to talk too much about this because it's like stuff that didn't happen, but we did throw around the idea of like, well, what if when I enter Unleash state, we have like, it's kind of similar to like the Mirage ambush mechanic for each weapon, where it would flip over your auto attack, and that would be kind of the unleashed attack per weapon. And the reason that didn't really come to end up in the final version is because it is kind of just, you know, blatant power creep, and it would just be adding additional skills to all of these existing weapons. Obviously, there's a lot more alternatives, and I won't talk through all the things we talked about. We did consider this a lot, and it's something that we're still thinking about, especially as we go forward. So something to keep in mind with the beta, obviously the hammer interactions are going to be a lot more visible. This is very similar to like Hollowsmith Heat and the interactions with the sword. Like sword is the only NG weapon that interacts with the heat mechanic on Hollowsmith. It's kind of the same thing, where we kind of built this weapon with the elite spec, so it makes a lot of sense. Okay, we can do something that fits really well. It makes a lot of sense. Like we look at this, with the shared cooldowns here, the offense-defense toggle. These things all kind of naturally fit with the unleash mechanic. So it's very easy. Similarly with Hollow-Smith Heat, we're building a whole new weapon. Here's Sword, we can make the heat interactions make sense instead of trying to just like ham-fist things into other weapons. But like that's also something we talk about a lot internally is like, well, should Hollow-Smith Heat interact with other engineer weapons? And so that's kind of where we are with the Unleash mechanic on other Ranger weapons at this point in time. So we'll see how it goes with the beta. Obviously you guys are going to be able to give a lot of feedback, see how it feels. I think like something like Greatsword, getting more damage on Maul is good. It's obviously a little bit less exciting than flipping your whole skill bar, but it's something that we're thinking about. It's definitely something that we want to get feedback around. And obviously the chat question makes a lot of sense because it is a very obvious, hey, what about this? Let's see, what else do I got? Any interesting talking points about... That's kind of an interesting thing if there's... Just going completely off the rails here, but Ruby's reading chat, so... if there's
Rat me out, man.
Well, we totally just revealed that, but you know, we're not going to sit here and just do
Someone
a full-fledged Q&A because we don't really have.
No, oh God.
We don't have time for that. We could do that later.
Please, I have a home.
Yeah, some people, you know, have some other work to do as well. So, but if there's anything interesting, maybe we'll find that. Is there anything else really interesting with the Untamed? I mean, a lot of the cantrips ended up just being kind of similar to what we were talking about with the Unleashed pet skills, where they are very much tools that we want to give to this melee frontliner. It's like, well, what does Ranger have access to right now? We have, all right, Signet of Stone is a good one, but it's kind of the only thing that you have there as the big damage mitigation. So we looked at stuff like Perilous Gift as a different way to do that. We had the big damage reduction on Force Fortification as well. Interesting, Force Fortification, this recharge time reduction per strike is not cooldown gated or anything. So if you are in these like giant Wovo fights, you can potentially get a lot of cooldown refunded. Obviously, I'm just going to be bullying golems who can't really move and get out of these attacks. But you see I'm cleaving a bunch of enemies. By the time I've already refunded actually the entire cooldown of this skill almost by the time it's over. And that's probably a little excessive. And I mean, it's more balanced around realistic gameplay. It's not balanced around hitting golems. But we'll definitely be keeping an eye on like how high the uptime of this skill is, but it is kind of like the defining elite skill. Here's the big damage reduction that really enables this frontlining capability. So we wanted to have this interesting play where it would be more and more available as you are hitting enemies, because it also gives kind of a built-in counterplay of, all right, well, if I just avoid all the attacks, then he's going to have a much longer cooldown on this ability. And so the rest of the stuff like Perilous Gift, it's just kind of a different flavor of Signet of Stone where you can't go below 1 HP, so it's damage reduction when you're low. Then also gives kind of an interesting way to give a heal because it's going to drain health from your pet. So again, very natural counterplay there of, hey, just hit the pet while this is active instead, and that's going to reduce the amount of healing given to the Ranger in that case. And other stuff we have like, you know, Exploding Spores. This one's a bit more, this is probably more of a PvE skill where it's just going to be a big, nice AoE damage ability. A little bit of potential to get maybe some combos going with, off of an allied CC, you're going to be casting this, get that nice centered all 6 spores on a single target that's going to give you that knockdown. But primarily it's more of just like this AoE damage. It's kind of like a well that all happens at once instead of pulsing over time. Then we have stuff like, you know, look at Mutate Conditions. Here's a big Condi cleanse, because again, Ranger problems. Where's my Condi removal? It's in Wilderness Survival, and all I can do is take Wilderness Survival and slot Wilderness Knowledge, take a bunch of survival skills. That's kind of the best way for a Ranger to have access to Condi Cleanse. So we wanted to give a couple different opportunities for that within, again, in the cantrips, we have the full cleanse on Mutate Conditions. A little bit over-tuned, or I guess aggressively tuned, 30-second cooldown full Condi Cleanse. So we did throw kind of the self-vuln on there to balance that a little bit. And it also plays really nicely with just Cleansing Unleash because you get a big stack of Condis, cleanse it with Mutate Conditions, then swap with Cleansing Unleash. That is going to cleanse the vuln on you. Alternatively, there's just kind of like a little bit of sustained Condi Cleanse over time as you're switching between the Unleashed stances. Unnatural Traversal, I mean, melee characters like to be in melee range, so, and we were already giving every character Shadow Steps this expansion, it felt like, so, you know, give the Shadow Step to the Untamed as well. And I really like, we see this mechanic on Ride the Lightning as well on Elementalist, where it rewards you for hitting something, it rewards you for going in and engaging with your enemy instead of running away from a fight. So we're using that again here, because again, go in, fight people, and then you'll have more access to that mobility skill. And last up, I mean, Nature's Binding. Again, it's just a different flavor of crowd control. We obviously have a lot of CC on the hammer already. We have a little bit with Exploding Spores, but not really. This is just going to be that like big, potentially wide area AoE CC skill that is, again, going to set up your team, set up yourself for just some big damage coming out there. That's pretty much it. Not too much crazy in-depth stuff to talk about with the Untamed here. I mean, a lot of these CC value traits are kind of interesting because obviously like all of the CC skills on the hammer are on the baseline version, but you can swap while casting it. So you saw in the past where I start casting Thump, swap, then I'm going to get quickness out of this and apply vulnerability instead of the alternative where it's stability and weakness. So some opportunity to get that interplay there. But so we'll wrap up for the Bunny Thumper, of course, Bunny Thumper.
Real fast before you do wrap up, since we aren't able to show them, do you want to run through real quick what the pets are for the Ranger? What the new pets are?
Right, new pets for the Ranger. We talked about this earlier, but we'll just bring it up again. And again, these won't be in for the beta, won't be in for beta 3, won't be in for beta 4. These will be ready for launch. We have the Phoenix, we have the White Tiger, we have the Wallow, and the Baby Siege Turtle, which is awesome.